Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world where your breath freezes before it leaves your mouth and the horizon is nothing but an endless sweep of white death. You've survived pandemic lockdowns, power outages, maybe even a camping trip without Wi-Fi, so yeah, you probably won't survive this either. But let's pretend it's 1914 and you just signed up for what you thought would be a nice polar expedition. Spoiler alert, it's about to become the longest, coldest, most brutal survival story in human history. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm not going to chase you across the ice with a seal club over it. And hey, drop your city and the time you're watching this down in the comments. I love knowing who else is awake during these quiet hours, probably in a heated room that would feel like paradise compared to where we're going. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a warm blanket, and let's walk together into the frozen hell that was Shackleton's endurance expedition. You wake up in a wooden bunk that's barely wider than a coffin. The air is so cold your first breath feels like swallowing glass shards. Your blanket is stiff with frozen condensation from your own breath. And congratulations, you've just experienced your first morning aboard the Endurance, trapped in Antarctic pack ice. The ship creaks around you like a giant wooden accordion being slowly compressed by invisible hands. Each groan echoes through the hull, a constant reminder that tons of ice are pressing against your only shelter. You smell tar, wet wool, seal oil and something else, the metallic scent of fear mixed with unwashed bodies. 27 other men are packed into this floating wooden box with you, and you're all about to learn what claustrophobia really means. Here's a fun fact you didn't ask for. The Endurance was actually built specifically for polar conditions, reinforced with iron and designed to withstand ice pressure. What the builders didn't account for was the Antarctic pack ice, acting like a giant patient monster that would slowly squeeze the life out of their beautiful ship over 10 months. You stumble up onto the deck and the first thing that hits you isn't the cold, it's the sound. Absolute silence broken only by the occasional crack and groan of ice shifting. It's like nature hit the mute button on the entire world. The ship is locked solid in a white prison that stretches to every horizon. Yesterday you were sailing toward adventure. Today you're basically living in a very expensive, very uncomfortable igloo. The ice surrounding your ship isn't smooth like a skating rink. It's jagged, broken, piled up in ridges that look like frozen mountain ranges. Some chunks are bigger than houses, pressed together so tightly you could walk for miles without seeing water. It's beautiful in the way a car crash is beautiful, stunning and terrible and completely beyond your control. You might not realize it yet, but you're looking at your home for the next 497 days. That's not a typo. 1 year, 4 months and 12 days of being trapped in ice that moves like a glacier but squeezes like a boa constrictor. Your phone battery wouldn't last 2 days in this cold. You're going to be here long enough to see your fingernails grow out multiple times. Ernest Shackleton, your fearless leader, stands on deck looking remarkably calm for a man whose expedition just turned into an extended camping trip in hell. He's got this way of smiling that makes you think either he knows something you don't, or he's completely insane. The jury's still out on which. And here's where it gets weird. The plan was to cross Antarctica on foot, the whole continent. You were going to start at one coast, walk across the most hostile environment on Earth, and emerge on the other side like some kind of polar superhero. Instead, you're now playing the world's slowest, coldest game of bumper cars with icebergs the size of city blocks. Listen to the ice shifting around the ship. It sounds like whale song mixed with breaking bones. The pressure is constant, relentless. You can actually hear the ship's timbers protesting as thousands of tons of ice press against the hull. It's the kind of sound that makes your teeth ache and your stomach clench. You check your watch. If it's still working in this cold, time moves differently here. Days blend into nights, which blend into weeks. The sun skims along the horizon without setting, or disappears entirely for months. Your circadian rhythm is about to get more confused than a tourist in Times Square. The temperature is hovering around minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. That's cold enough to freeze spit before it hits the ground. Cold enough to turn your fingers into clumsy clubs inside your mittens. Cold enough to make every breath feel like you're inhaling broken glass. And this is summer in Antarctica. Winter is coming, and with it, temperatures that would make a penguin cry, but here's the thing that would really mess with your head. You can't leave. There's no calling an Uber, no walking to the nearest Starbucks, no giving up and going home. You're committed now, whether you like it or not. The ice has made that decision for you, fringe fact that'll keep you up at night. Some of the pressure ridges around the ship are over 30 feet high. Imagine walls of broken ice taller than a 2-story house created by forces so powerful they could crush a building. Now imagine sleeping next to them every night, listening to them shift and crack and threaten to come down on top of you. You head back below deck where the air is slightly warmer, but thick with the smell of men who haven't had a proper bath in weeks. The ship's cat, Mrs. Chippy, looks at you with the kind of disdain that says she knows exactly how screwed you all are. Even the cat is judging your life choices. 27 men, 1 ship, and an ocean of ice that stretches beyond every horizon. You're about to learn what it really means to be alone in the world, surrounded by the most beautiful and deadly landscape on Earth. Sweet dreams. You step outside again and immediately understand why early explorers called this place the White Desert. Except deserts are warm, and this is like being inside a freezer that someone forgot to turn off forever. The cold hits you like a physical wall. Your face goes numb in seconds. Your eyes water and the tears freeze on your cheeks like tiny diamonds. The ship lists slightly to one side, held at an angle by the ice that's gripping it like a giant frozen fist. Walking on deck feels like navigating a funhouse, everything tilted just enough to throw off your balance. You grab the rigging to steady yourself and instantly regret it. The rope is cold enough to stick to your skin through your gloves. Here's your morning routine in polar hell. Wake up in a bunk that's somehow both too narrow and too cold, fumble for clothes that are stiff with ice, struggle into boots that feel like frozen cardboard, and stumble outside to check if you're still trapped in the middle of nowhere. Spoiler, you are. The ice around the ship tells a story of incredible violence. Pressure ridges twist and buckle where different sheets of ice collided. Some look like frozen waterfalls, others like the spines of sleeping giants. The forces that created these formations could snap your ship like a breadstick. And they're constantly shifting, grinding, pressing closer. You watch Thomas Audet-Lees, the ship's photographer, trying to take pictures with equipment that keeps freezing. His camera looks like it's made of ice crystals. Every few minutes he has to warm the shutter mechanism with his breath, which immediately turns to frost on the metal. It's like trying to use an iPhone in weather that would kill the iPhone, the person holding it, and probably their entire family tree. The sound of the ice is hypnotic and terrifying. Constant creaking, like the world's largest haunted house. Occasional sharp cracks that echo across the frozen landscape like gunshots. And underneath it all, a low grinding noise as millions of tons of ice shift and settle. It's the sound of nature rearranging itself with forces that make earthquakes look gentle. Frank Wild, Shackleton's second in command, mentions that the ice is moving. Not quickly, but constantly. The entire ice pack is drifting north at about 2 miles per day. You're not just trapped, you're trapped on a giant ice raft that's slowly carrying you away from any hope of rescue. It's like being kidnapped by the planet itself. You might not realize it, but you're currently experiencing something that would break most modern humans within days. No internet, no heating, no escape plan, and no idea when it might end. Your smartphone would be dead weight in your pocket, assuming the cold hadn't already killed it. You're living in a world where the most advanced technology is a compass and a chronometer. The ship's dog teams are restless. 29 sled dogs pacing in their makeshift kennels on deck, sensing something's wrong with the intelligence that makes you uncomfortable. They know things you don't. They can smell changes in the weather, feel vibrations in the ice, hear sounds beyond human range, and right now they're nervous. Listen to the wind cutting across the ice. It doesn't whistle like wind through trees or howl like wind through city streets. It hisses like a giant snake, carrying crystals of ice that sting any exposed skin. The wind chill makes the already brutal temperature feel even colder. Your body is burning calories just trying to stay alive. Here's a historical fact that'll make you grateful for central heating. The men slept in reindeer fur sleeping bags that could freeze solid if they got wet. Imagine trying to climb into a sleeping bag that's literally frozen stiff, like trying to sleep inside a fur-lined board. And if your body heat wasn't enough to warm it up, you'd spend the night shivering against ice-hard fur. The galley, which is basically the kitchen, produces meals that are nutritious but are yet utterly joyless. Pemmican, a mixture of dried meat and fat that tastes like cardboard mixed with sadness. Hardtack biscuits that could break your teeth. canned vegetables that have been frozen and thawed so many times they've given up on life. It's like eating depression with a spoon. But here's the thing that would really mess with your modern mind. There's no escape from these people. No going to your own apartment, no headphones to block out annoying conversations, no privacy of any kind. You're living in the most cramped conditions imaginable with 27 other men who haven't bathed properly in months and are slowly going insane from isolation and cold. You lean against the ship's rail and look out at the endless white expanse. Somewhere out there, beyond the horizon, normal life continues. People are going to work, complaining about traffic, updating their social media. But you might as well be on another planet. The isolation is so complete it's almost spiritual, if spirituality involved slowly freezing to death. The ice pressure against the ship's hull increases throughout the day. You can feel it through the deck, a constant stress that makes the entire vessel groan in protest. It's like being inside a giant wooden drum that's slowly being squeezed by an invisible hand. And you're starting to understand that the ship, your only shelter in this frozen wasteland, is not as indestructible as you hoped. Fringe fact that'll haunt your dreams. Polar explorers sometimes reported hearing voices in the wind, phantom sounds that seemed to come from the ice itself. Whether it was psychological stress, acoustic tricks played by the environment, or just the sound of their own sanity slowly cracking, no one knows. But when you're alone in the most isolated place on Berlin, Earth, your mind starts playing games you never signed up for. As night falls, which takes forever because the sun barely moves, you realise you've survived another day in what is essentially a frozen prison. Tomorrow will be exactly the same, except maybe colder, and the day after that, and the day after that. You're beginning to understand what Shackleton didn't put in the recruitment ad. You wake up to discover that your water bottle has frozen solid overnight, even though you kept it inside your sleeping bag. This is your new reality check. If water freezes against your body heat, imagine what the actual air temperature is doing to everything else. Your breath forms instant clouds that freeze and fall back onto your face like tiny ice pellets. The morning routine aboard the trapped Endurance has become a careful dance of survival tasks. Check the ship for ice damage, feed the dogs, try to keep your extremities from going numb. Pretend that everything is totally fine, and this is all part of the plan. It's like the world's most dangerous version of Groundhog Day, except Bill Murray never had to worry about losing his toes to frostbite. Frank Hurley, the expedition photographer, is trying to document everything with equipment that keeps malfunctioning in the cold. His camera plates crack in the low temperatures. The chemicals for developing photos turn to slush. But he keeps working because he knows this story needs to be told, assuming anyone survives to tell it. It's like trying to run a photography studio inside a freezer that's actively trying to kill you. You step onto the deck and the cold hits like a physical slap. Minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit, which sounds like a number until you experience it as a living thing that wants to steal the heat from your body. Your nose hairs freeze instantly. Your eyeballs feel like they're turning to ice. Even your thoughts seem to slow down in the cold. The ice around the ship has shifted overnight, creating new pressure ridges and closing gaps that yesterday looked like possible escape routes. It's like waking up to find that the landscape has been completely rearranged by invisible giants. The ice doesn't care about your plans, your timeline, or your survival. It follows its own ancient rules. Here's a fun fact that'll make you appreciate your morning coffee. The men drink tea made from melted ice, but the ice often tastes like seal breath and penguin droppings because that's what's been living on it. Imagine your morning beverage tasting like a combination of fish and barnyard animals. Suddenly that expensive coffee you complain about seems like liquid gold. You watch Alexander Macklin, one of the ship's doctors, examining crew members for signs of scurvy, frostbite, and what would later be recognised as severe vitamin D deficiency. There's no sun for months at a time, no fresh vegetables, no way to maintain normal human health in these conditions. Your body is slowly breaking down at the cellular level, and there's nothing anyone can do about it except wait and hope. The dogs are getting restless and aggressive. 29 huskies and mixed breeds pacing in their makeshift kennels, fighting over food, establishing pack hierarchies that sometimes turn violent. They sense the stress of their human companions and reflect it back in ways that make everyone nervous. It's like having a barometer for group morale that occasionally tries to bite you. Listen to the sound of ice grinding against the ship's hull. It's constant now. A low rumbling that vibrates through the wooden deck and into your bones. The ship's timbers creak in response, a conversation between wood and ice that sounds increasingly desperate. You're living inside an instrument that's slowly being tuned to its breaking point. The ship's library becomes a lifeline for sanity. Books frozen so solid you have to warm the pages with your breath before turning them. Reading by lamplight that casts dancing shadows on the ice-covered walls. Stories of tropical islands and warm beaches that seem like fairy tales from another universe. Literature as escapism takes on a whole new meaning when you are literally trapped at the bottom of the world. You might not realize it, but you're experiencing something that would destroy most modern attention spans within hours. No screens, no notifications, no constant stimulation, just ice, cold and the slow passage of time, marked by subtle changes in light and shadow. Your brain is being forced to entertain itself with resources it forgot it had. The meals are becoming repetitive in ways that would make prison food look gourmet. Pemmican again, hardtack again, canned meat that tastes like it was processed in a factory that also made dog food. The men joke about the menu, but underneath the humour is a growing awareness that food supplies are finite and rescue is nowhere in sight. Shackleton walks among the crew with the kind of forced cheerfulness that's either inspiring or deeply concerning depending on your mood. He makes jokes, tells stories, acts like being trapped in ice is just another minor inconvenience. But you catch him sometimes staring out at the horizon with an expression that suggests he knows exactly how desperate the situation is becoming. Here's a fringe fact that sounds made up but isn't. The men sometimes organised elaborate theatrical performances to pass time and maintain morale. Imagine putting on a play while trapped in a freezing ship surrounded by deadly ice. It's like community theatre for people who might not live to see the reviews. The ice pressure increases throughout the day. You can feel it in the way the ship sits differently, the way doors that used to close properly now stick or won't close at all. The hull is being slowly compressed by forces that could flatten a building. And you're sleeping inside that building every night, listening to it protest against the pressure. The isolation is becoming psychological torture. No news from the outside world, no way to communicate with anyone beyond this frozen bubble. For all you know, the world could have ended, and you'd be the last humans alive, playing out humanity's final chapter in a wooden ship slowly being crushed by ice. As another day ends with the sun making its lazy circle around the horizon without actually setting, you realise you've adapted to rhythms that would have seemed impossible weeks ago. You measure time by ice shifts instead of clocks. You judge temperature by how quickly your spit freezes instead of thermometers. You're becoming something other than the person who started this journey. And tomorrow will be exactly the same, except the ice will have moved a little closer. You wake up to a sound that makes your blood freeze faster than the air outside. The ship is screaming, not metaphorically, but actually screaming as tons of ice press against the hull with forces that make industrial crushers look gentle. The wooden timbers groan and crack in harmonies that sound like whale songs mixed with breaking bones. The Endurance shifts suddenly, tilting further to starboard as the ice grip tightens. Your bunk slides, your gear tumbles, and you realise you're living inside a building that's being demolished in slow motion by the planet itself. It's like being inside a house while invisible giants tear it apart board by board. You stumble onto deck and the scene looks like a war zone. Pressure ridges have grown overnight, towering walls of broken ice pushing against the ship's sides. Some chunks are bigger than cars, piled up like nature's version of abstract sculpture. Except this sculpture is actively trying to kill you by crushing your only shelter into kindling. Frank Wilde points out hairline cracks appearing in the ship's planking. The hull is literally being squeezed out of shape by pressure that measures in thousands of tons. You can see the wood bending in ways wood was never meant to bend. It's like watching the slow-motion destruction of everything standing between you and certain death. Here's a cheerful fact to start your day. The pressure from pack ice can exceed 200 tons per square foot. That's enough force to crush a locomotive into scrap metal. Your cosy wooden ship, no matter how well built, is essentially a matchstick construction in the grip of something that could squeeze coal into diamonds. The crew moves with the careful efficiency of people who know they're riding a disaster that could go catastrophic at any moment. Every task is performed with one eye on escape routes that don't exist. Tools are secured, supplies are checked, emergency plans are reviewed for situations that have no good outcomes. Thomas Ordelise mentions that he's been calculating drift rates and probable trajectories. According to his mathematics, the ice pack is carrying you steadily northwest, away from any possible rescue route, and toward areas that haven't been mapped by human beings. You're not just trapped, you're being kidnapped by geography itself. Listen to the symphony of destruction around you, the sharp crack of ice breaking under pressure, the deep groan of the ship's frame being compressed, the screech of metal fittings being twisted beyond their design limits, and underneath it all, the whispered hiss of snow being compressed into ice by forces beyond human comprehension. You watch the sled dogs pacing nervously in their kennels, sensing vibrations and sounds that human senses can't detect. They know something is seriously wrong with an animal intelligence that makes you want to trust their instincts over human optimism. When the dogs are worried, everyone should be worried. The ship's chronometer, crucial for the navigation, keeps freezing despite being wrapped in fur and kept near the engine. Time itself becomes unreliable in these conditions. Your pocket watch stops working. The sun provides no useful reference points. You're drifting through space and time with no accurate way to measure either. You might not realize it, but you're experiencing forces that shape the geography of entire continents. The same ice pressure that's slowly crushing your ship carved valleys, moved mountains, and created lakes thousands of miles away. You're getting a front row seat to geological processes that normally take centuries, compressed into days and hours. The galley produces meals that taste increasingly desperate. Food supplies are being rationed not because they're running low, but because no one knows how long they'll need to last. Every bite could be precious. Every crumb might matter. It's like playing Russian roulette with nutrition, while nature tries to crush you to death. Shackleton calls a meeting in the cramped quarters below deck. His voice is steady, but his eyes betray the mathematics of their situation. The ship might not survive much more pressure. The ice shows no signs of releasing its grip. Winter is approaching, which will make everything infinitely worse. He doesn't say it directly, but everyone understands. They need to start planning for the possibility that their floating home might become their floating coffin. Here's a fringe fact that sounds like fiction. Polar explorers sometimes reported that the ice seemed to have a malevolent intelligence, applying pressure at the worst possible moments and releasing it just long enough to give false hope before crushing down again. Whether this was pattern recognition or psychological projection doesn't matter when you're living through it. The temperature drops another 5 degrees as the day progresses. Your body is burning calories at an incredible rate just trying to maintain core temperature. You're essentially running a marathon while standing still, your metabolism working overtime against cold that wants to shut down every biological process you depend on to stay alive. The ice around the ship continues to shift and buckle, creating new formations that look like frozen cathedrals or the ruins of ancient cities. Is beautiful in the way that avalanches are beautiful, stunning and terrible, and completely indifferent to human survival. You're living inside a constantly changing landscape that could become your tomb at any moment. As night falls without the sun actually setting, just dimming slightly in its endless circle around the horizon, you listen to the ship settling into new positions dictated by ice pressure. Every creak could be normal movement or the sound of critical structural failure. There's no way to tell the difference until it's too late. You're learning to sleep with the sound of your shelter being slowly destroyed around you. It's like trying to relax while nature gives your house a very slow, very thorough demolition job. Sweet dreams are made of these, apparently. You discover that boredom can be more dangerous than frostbite when you're trapped in a frozen hellscape with nothing to do but think about how trapped you are. Your mind starts playing tricks that would make a psychiatric ward look like a day spa. Time stretches and compresses in ways that make no sense. Minutes feel like hours, days blur together, and you start losing track of what month it is. The ship's library becomes a battleground for mental health. Men fight over books like they're made of gold instead of frozen paper. Reading the same novel 5 times stops being weird and starts being necessary survival strategy. You find yourself memorizing entire passages just to have something new to think about when you're staring at the ceiling of your bunk. listening to ice trying to crush your home. Frank Hurley sets up a makeshift darkroom in one of the ship's storage compartments, developing photographs by lamplight in temperatures that make the chemicals behave in unexpected ways. His images capture moments of beauty in this white hell. Ice formations that look like crystal palaces and sunsets that paint the frozen landscape in colours that don't seem real. You watch Alexander Macklin and James McIlroy, the ship's doctors, inventing creative ways to keep the crew healthy in conditions that seem designed to break human bodies and minds. They organise exercise routines on the deck that look like interpretive dance performed by people wearing every piece of clothing they own. Jumping jacks at -40 degrees is its own special kind of our madness. Here's a delightful fact about polar psychology. Extended isolation in extreme conditions can cause something called polar madness, or kafardtiestotelsit, where people become irrationally angry, depressed, or detached from reality. It's like cabin fever, but with the added bonus of knowing that outside your cabin is a landscape that will kill you in minutes. The crew develops elaborate rituals around mealtimes, not because the food is worth celebrating, but because shared activities become anchors for sanity. Formal dinner announcements for meals that consist of tinned meat and hardtack, table manners that would be ridiculous anywhere else but feel crucial here. Civilization as performance art in a place where civilization has no business existing. Thomas Audelise starts organising entertainment committees and discussion groups. Debates about philosophy while trapped in ice take on a surreal quality. Arguments about literature become passionate affairs when literature is your only escape from reality. It's like a university seminar program designed by someone who wants to test how much intellectual stimulation humans need to avoid going completely insane. Listen to the conversations around you. Men who've been together for months start finishing each other's sentences in ways that are either touching or deeply disturbing. Personal space becomes a concept from another world. Privacy is a luxury that doesn't exist when you're living in a wooden box with 27 other people who are slowly going stir-crazy. The dogs provide psychological relief that no one expected. Playing with animals that are happy to see you, regardless of how desperate your situation becomes, offers moments of normalcy that feel precious. A dog doesn't care that you're trapped in ice. It just wants attention, food and warmth. Sometimes simple needs are the most healing. You might not realise it, but you're developing psychological coping mechanisms that psychologists won't have names for until decades later. Compartmentalization becomes an art form. Denial becomes a survival tool. Hope becomes a choice you make every morning, not a feeling that happens naturally. The ship's quarters develop their own social ecosystem. Men who never would have spoken to each other in normal circumstances become close friends or bitter enemies. Class distinctions that seemed important in England become meaningless when everyone's equally likely to freeze to death. Democracy emerges naturally when aristocracy becomes pointless in the face of universal mortality. Shackleton demonstrates leadership that seems almost supernatural. He remembers everyone's birthday, organises celebrations for holidays that feel absurd in these conditions, tells jokes that aren't funny but somehow lift spirits anyway. It's like watching someone perform optimism as a full-time job while internally calculating the odds of everyone dying horribly. Here's a quirky detail that illustrates how humans adapt. The men start naming ice formations and pressure ridges like they're permanent landmarks. Meet me by the cathedral ice. Watch out for the Dragon Ridge. They're creating a geography of temporary frozen sculptures, building familiarity in a landscape that changes daily. The isolation from the outside world becomes almost metaphysical. No news, no mail, no confirmation that the rest of humanity still exists. For all you know, you could be the last people alive on Earth, playing out the final chapter of human civilization in a ship slowly being digested by Antarctic ice. The philosophical implications of complete isolation start eating away at sanity like acid. Musical instruments frozen solid get warmed by the ship's stove for evening concerts that sound like a combination of classical music and the groaning of tortured wood. Leonard Hussey plays banjo concerts that become religious experiences when you're desperate for any sound that isn't ice trying to kill you. Music as medication for minds that are slowly unravelling. The temperature inside the ship hovers just above freezing, which means everything is slightly damp, slightly frozen, and completely uncomfortable. Your breath fogs constantly. Condensation freezes on the walls and falls like snow inside your shelter. It's like living in a refrigerator that's broken in exactly the wrong way. As another day ends without meaningful change, you realise you're developing a strange relationship with hopelessness. It's not depression exactly, but a kind of acceptance that normal life might be permanently over. You're adapting to being trapped not just physically, but existentially, in a situation that has no clear resolution. You fall asleep to the sound of ice rearranging itself around your wooden prison, dreaming of warm places that feel more fictional than any fantasy novel. You wake up to the ship tilting at an angle that makes walking require mountain climbing skills. The Endurance is no longer sitting level in the ice. It's being twisted and lifted by pressure that treats a 300-ton wooden ship like a toy boat in a bathtub, operated by a very angry child. The hull makes sounds that would be concerning coming from a building, but are absolutely terrifying coming from the only thing keeping you alive in the most hostile environment on Earth. Wood splits with sharp cracks that echo through the ship. Metal fittings screech as they're bent beyond their design limits. It's like living inside a percussion instrument that's being played by an orchestra of destruction. Frank Wild shows you stress fractures appearing in the main beams. The ship's spine is literally breaking under pressure that no engineer ever calculated for. You can see daylight through gaps in the planking that was solid yesterday. Your house is developing holes while you're still living in it, in conditions where having holes in your house means dying quickly and unpleasantly. You step onto deck and witness the ice performing geological engineering in real time. Pressure ridges tower 30 feet above the ship, for walls of broken ice that look like frozen waterfalls or the ruins of crystal cities. The forces creating these formations could snap your ship like a pencil, and they're pressing closer every hour. Here's a comforting thought to start your morning. The ice pressure around the Endurance now measures over 10 million tons. That's roughly equivalent to having the Great Pyramid of Giza pressing against your house from all sides. Your cosy wooden ship is basically a crouton in the grip of a geological vice. The crew works with the focused intensity of people who know they're performing maintenance on a structure that's actively being destroyed around them. Pumping water from the bilge becomes a full-time job as ice pressure forces water through seams that were perfectly watertight in normal conditions. It's like trying to fix a leaking roof during a hurricane, except the hurricane is made of ice and wants to crush you. Thomas Ord-Lees calculates that the ship has been lifted nearly 4 feet out of its natural waterline by the ice pressing underneath. You're no longer floating, you're being held in the grip of frozen forces that could squeeze coal into diamonds. The Endurance has become a ship that's flying through ice instead of sailing through water. Listen to the conversation between ice and wood happening all around you. The deep groaning of timber under stress, the sharp crack of planks splitting, the screech of iron fittings being twisted into new shapes. And underneath it all, the grinding rumble of millions of tons of ice shifting positions like sleeping giants rolling over in bed. The dogs sense the escalating crisis with animal intelligence that makes human optimism look foolish. They pace, whine, and cluster together in ways that suggest they understand the ship is in serious trouble. When creatures that evolved to survive in polar conditions are nervous, humans should probably be terrified. You watch Frank Hurley documenting the destruction with photographic equipment that keeps malfunctioning in the cold. His images capture the surreal beauty of watching your shelter being demolished by nature. Ice formations that look like abstract sculptures, pressure ridges that resemble frozen cathedrals, and a ship that's slowly being transformed into something that's part vessel, part art installation. The meals in the galley take on an increasingly desperate quality. Not because food is running low, but because eating dinner in a dining room that's being crushed around you adds a surreal element to already challenging cuisine. Imagine trying to enjoy canned beef while the walls of your restaurant slowly cave in. Shackleton maintains his public optimism with what must be incredible psychological effort. He jokes about the ship's renovations and refers to the ice pressure as nature's furniture rearrangement. But you catch glimpses of him staring at the destruction with the expression of someone calculating odds that keep getting worse. You might not realize it, but you're witnessing forces that shape the landscape of entire continents. The same ice pressure that's currently destroying your ship carved the Great Lakes, moved mountains, and created valleys that are now hundreds of miles away. You're getting a front row seat to geological processes that normally take thousands of years. The ship's chronometer stops working entirely, not from cold this time, but from vibration as the hull is constantly twisted and flexed by ice pressure. Time becomes even more fluid when you can't measure it accurately. Days blend into nights that never quite become night, marked only by subtle changes in light and the steady progression of destruction around you. Here's a fringe fact that sounds fictional. Some polar explorers reported that ships caught in ice pressure seemed to scream like living things as they were destroyed. Whether this was acoustic phenomena or psychological projection doesn't matter when you're living inside the screaming ship. The temperature drops to minus 45 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to make breathing feel like inhaling broken glass. Your body is burning calories at an unsustainable rate just trying to maintain core temperature. You're essentially running a marathon while standing still, your metabolism fighting a war against cold that wants to shut down every biological process you need to stay alive. The ice formations around the ship continue evolving, creating landscapes that look like alien worlds or the frozen dreams of mad architects. It's beautiful in the way that disasters are beautiful, awesome and terrible and completely indifferent to human survival. As the day progresses without the sun actually moving in any meaningful way, you realise you're living through the slow-motion destruction of everything familiar. Your home is being demolished around you by forces beyond human control or understanding. And tomorrow, if there is a tomorrow, will bring more of the same. You fall asleep to the sound of your shelter being systematically dismantled by the planet itself, wondering if you'll wake up inside a ship or inside a pile of kindling surrounded by ice that wants to kill you. You wake up to silence. Not the peaceful silence of a quiet morning, but the terrifying silence of a ship that has stopped fighting against the ice. The constant groaning and creaking that became your lullaby for months has been replaced by occasional sharp cracks that sound like gunshots echoing through the hull. The Endurance sits at an impossible angle, tilted so severely that walking from bow to stern feels like climbing a mountain. Your bunk has become a slide that deposits you against the wall whenever you try to sleep. Everything that wasn't nailed down has migrated to the low side of the ship, creating a pile of possessions that looks like the contents of someone's life being sorted by gravity. Frank Wilde's morning inspection reveals what everyone has been dreading but no one wanted to say out loud. The ship's back is broken. The main keel has snapped under pressure that finally exceeded the limits of even reinforced polar construction. You're no longer living in a ship, you're living in a collection of wooden pieces that happen to still be roughly ship-shaped. You step onto deck and witness the aftermath of forces that treated your sturdy vessel like a paper boat. The mainmast tilts at an angle that makes it look drunk. Rigging hangs loose like broken spider webs. The deck itself has buckled in places, creating hills and valleys where there should be flat planking. Here's a cheerful update on your housing situation. The hull now has gaps wide enough to put your hand through. Daylight streams through cracks that were solid wood yesterday. The thing that's been protecting you from the most hostile environment on Earth is developing holes, and those holes are getting bigger by the hour. The crew moves with the careful deliberation of people who know they're performing the last maintenance on a structure that's already dead. Pumping water from the bilge becomes a desperate race against physics as ice-cold seawater pours through seams that can no longer be sealed. It's like trying to empty the ocean with a bucket, while the ocean keeps refilling itself through your floor. Thomas Audelise points out that the ship's compass is spinning wildly because the iron fittings are being twisted into positions that create magnetic interference. You've lost the ability to navigate accurately just as you're about to need navigation more than you've ever needed anything in your life. Listen to the ship's death song, the sharp crack of wood splitting under stress, the splash of water entering spaces that were dry for months, the groan of metal being bent beyond its breaking point, and underneath it all, the grinding rumble of ice that has won its war against human engineering. The sled dogs pace restlessly, sensing that their floating home is becoming uninhabitable. 29 animals that depend on humans for survival, watching those same humans realise they can no longer provide even basic shelter. It's like being responsible for a classroom full of children while the school burns down around you. Shackleton calls a meeting in the tilted cabin that feels more like a formal surrender than a planning session. The ship is doomed. Everyone knows it, even if no one wants to say it directly. The conversation focuses on salvaging supplies and preparing for life on the ice, as if living on a frozen ocean in Antarctic winter is a reasonable backup plan. You watch Frank Hurley preparing to abandon most of his photographic equipment, keeping only what can be carried by hand. Months of images documenting the expedition, the ship, the ice, the slow progression toward disaster, will be left behind as the vessel becomes a frozen monument to human ambition crushed by natural forces. The galley produces what might be the last hot meal served aboard the Endurance. Eating in a dining room that's tilted like a funhouse while discussing evacuation plans gives the cuisine a surreal quality that makes hardtack and tinned meat seem almost poetic. You might not realize it, but you're about to become homeless in the most literal and terrifying sense of the word. Your house is being destroyed by forces beyond human control, and your new address will be somewhere on the ice, with a life expectancy measured in days rather than years. The ship's library, which provided psychological salvation for months, is now underwater as the vessel settles into the ice at increasingly bizarre angles. Books that were lifelines for sanity float in bilge water that tastes of seal oil and despair, knowledge drowning in a wooden ship that's slowly being digested by the Antarctic. Here's a fringe fact that illustrates the power of what you're facing. When ships are crushed by ice pressure, the destruction often happens so slowly that crews have time to watch every beam break, every plank split, every fitting bend beyond repair. It's not a sudden catastrophe, it's a detailed education in how human engineering fails when nature decides to apply pressure. The temperature inside the ship drops towards the outside temperature, as gaps in the hull eliminate any possibility of maintaining warmth. Your shelter is becoming indistinguishable from the environment that's trying to kill you. The boundary between inside and outside is dissolving along with your chances of survival. The ice around the ship continues its patient work of destruction, pressing and grinding and squeezing until the Endurance looks less like a vessel and more like a wooden sculpture created by forces that don't care about human intentions or human survival. As night falls without the sun actually setting, you realize you're spending your last evening aboard the ship that was supposed to carry you to glory and adventure. Tomorrow you'll wake up in a tent on the ice if you wake up at all. You pack your most essential possessions into a bag that can be carried by hand, choosing between survival gear and sentimental items that suddenly seem precious beyond description. Every decision is a bet on what you'll need to stay alive in conditions that kill most people within hours. The Endurance settles deeper into the ice with sounds that suggest the planet is slowly swallowing the last remnant of your civilized world. Sweet dreams indeed. You wake up in a tent that's basically a fabric box sitting on ice that could crack open and swallow you at any moment. The temperature inside your new home hovers around minus 30 degrees, which is tropical compared to the minus 50 degrees outside. Your breath creates instant frost clouds that freeze and fall back onto your face like disappointed snow. The camp spreads across the ice in a pattern that looks optimistic from a distance and completely desperate up close. Canvas tents that flap in the wind like distress signals. Supply dumps that contain everything you own in the world, which isn't much. And in the distance, the Endurance, tilted at an angle that makes it look like a drunk giant taking a nap in the ice. Frank Wild organises the camp with military precision that can't quite hide the fact that you're all homeless now, living on a frozen ocean with no backup plan and no idea how long the ice will support your weight. It's like camping, except camping, where the ground might decide to open up and drop you into water that will kill you in seconds. You step outside your tent and immediately understand why early explorers compared Antarctica to hell, except hell is supposed to be warm. The wind cuts through every layer of clothing you own. Your face goes numb in seconds. Your eyes water and the tears freeze on your cheeks like tiny monuments to regret. Here's a delightful update on your living situation. You're now residing on ice that's floating on an ocean that's 2 miles deep. Your new neighbourhood has no postal service, no emergency services, and no neighbours except penguins that are smarter than you because they know better than to stay here when winter comes. The daily routine becomes a careful balance of survival tasks that would seem absurd anywhere else but are matters of life and death here. Melting ice for drinking water using fuel that might run out. Rationing food that has to last an unknown amount of time. Checking the ice for cracks that could split your campsite in half. Thomas Orde-Lees sets up navigation equipment on the ice, trying to determine exactly where you are and where the ice is carrying you. The calculations are depressing. You're drifting steadily northwest, away from any shipping lanes, toward areas of the Antarctic that haven't been mapped because no sane person goes there. Listen to the sounds of your new environment. The constant groan of ice under pressure. The snap and crack of the frozen surface adjusting to temperature changes. The whistle of wind across empty spaces that stretch to every horizon. And occasionally the distant splash of ice carving into the ocean, reminding you that your floor could disappear at any moment. The dogs are the only creatures in camp that seem genuinely comfortable with the situation. They dig snow caves, play in temperatures that would kill humans in minutes, and demonstrate survival instincts that make human intelligence look like a design flaw. Watching them adapt makes you realise how poorly equipped humans are for this environment. Shackleton walks through the camp each morning, checking on men who are living in conditions that would break most people mentally before they broke them physically. His optimism is becoming increasingly supernatural, like watching someone perform hope as a full-time job while calculating the mathematical probability of everyone dying horribly. You watch Frank Hurley salvaging photographic equipment from the dying ship, determined to document a story that might never be told if everyone becomes a footnote in polar exploration history. His commitment to capturing images of slow-motion disaster is either admirable or completely insane depending on your perspective. The meals consist of food that was designed for a ship's galley, not for outdoor cooking in temperatures that make propane behave like a solid. Everything tastes like it's been filtered through ice and disappointment. Meals become rituals of survival rather than nutrition, shared experiences that bond men together in the face of probable death. You might not realise it, but you're experiencing isolation that's more complete than anything most humans have ever endured. You're further from civilization than astronauts on the space station. At least astronauts have mission control and a planned return trip. You have ice, wind, and the mathematical certainty that your situation is getting worse every day. The ship continues its slow death in the distance, gradually being absorbed by ice that treats 300 tons of reinforced wood like a minor inconvenience. Watching your former home disappear feels like watching your past being erased by forces that don't care about human attachment to material objects. Here's a fringe fact that'll keep you awake in your frozen tent. Ice can shift suddenly, creating leads, open water channels that appear without warning. Men have fallen asleep on solid ice and woken up floating on ice floes that are drifting away from camp. It's like sleeping on a foundation that might decide to become a boat in the middle of the night. The cold is becoming a living thing that follows you everywhere. It creeps into your tent through tiny gaps in the fabric. It steals heat from your body faster than you can generate it. It turns simple tasks like getting dressed into complex survival challenges that require planning and determination. The endless daylight messes with circadian rhythms that evolved for a world with predictable cycles of light and dark. Your body doesn't know when to sleep, when to wake up, or when to be hungry. Time becomes fluid when the sun refuses to set or provide any useful information about what part of the day you're supposed to be experiencing. As night falls without actually falling, you realise you've survived another day in conditions that are actively trying to kill you. Your new address is Ice Floe number 1, Antarctica, and your life expectancy is measured in weeks rather than years. You crawl into a sleeping bag that's already cold, listening to the ice shifting and cracking beneath your tent, wondering if you'll wake up tomorrow or if the ice will decide to rearrange itself while you sleep. Welcome to the neighbourhood. Population 28 humans who are probably going to die, and some dogs who are handling the situation much better than anyone wants to admit. You wake up to discover that your sleeping bag has frozen to the tent floor overnight. Getting up requires peeling yourself off ice like a particularly stubborn sticker, accompanied by sounds that suggest either your gear is breaking or your body is. The condensation from your breath has created an interior ice sculpture that looks like abstract art, if abstract art were designed to remind you of your mortality. The morning routine in camp survival includes checking whether the ice beneath your tent developed any new cracks during the night. It's like performing a home inspection on a house that's floating on an ocean and might decide to split in half without warning. You walk carefully around the perimeter, looking for hairline fractures that could become crevasses that swallow your entire camp. Frank Wilde organises his work details with the efficiency of someone who knows that staying busy is the difference between maintaining morale and watching men slowly lose their minds. Ice has to be chopped for drinking water. Seals have to be hunted for food and fuel. Equipment has to be maintained in conditions that destroy equipment faster than it can be repaired. You step outside your tent and the cold hits like a physical assault from the universe itself. -40 degrees Fahrenheit, which is cold enough to freeze your spit before it hits the ground and make every breath feel like inhaling razor blades. Your nose hairs freeze instantly, creating tiny icicles that make breathing through your nose a unique form of torture. Here's your daily weather report. It's cold, it's going to stay cold, and tomorrow will be colder. The wind chill makes the already brutal temperature feel like nature is personally angry at you for existing. Your body burns calories just trying to maintain core temperature, essentially running a marathon while standing still. The camp kitchen operates in conditions that would make Gordon Ramsay weep. Cooking with fuel that has to be conserved, using pots that freeze to your hands if you're not careful, preparing meals from ingredients that were never designed to be appetizing. Every meal is a triumph of survival over culinary expectations. Thomas Audie Lees calculates the camp's position using navigation equipment that keeps freezing and provides coordinates that confirm you're in the middle of absolutely nowhere, drifting farther from anywhere humans might reasonably be expected to survive. It's like having GPS that only works to tell you how screwed you are. Listen to the soundtrack of your new life. The constant groan of ice adjusting to pressure and temperature changes, the snap and crack of the frozen surface expanding and contracting, the howl of wind across empty spaces that stretch beyond every horizon, and occasionally the distant rumble of icebergs calving, reminding you that your floor is temporary. The dogs provide psychological therapy that no one expected but everyone desperately needs. Playing with animals that are genuinely happy to see you, regardless of how desperate your situation has become, offers moments of normalcy that feel precious beyond description. Dogs don't care about your survival odds. They just want attention and food. Shackleton moves through the camp like a man performing optimism as community service. He remembers birthdays, tells jokes that aren't funny but somehow lift spirits anyway, organises activities that seem absurd given the circumstances, but provide crucial mental health maintenance. Leadership as performance art in conditions where performance might be the only thing keeping people sane. You watch Frank Hurley setting up his camera equipment on the ice, documenting life in conditions that most humans will never experience and probably shouldn't. His images capture the surreal beauty of living in a landscape that wants to kill you. Ice formations that look like frozen dreams, and men who are slowly being transformed by isolation and cold. The ship, visible in the distance, continues its slow death as ice pressure gradually reduces it from vessel to debris. Watching your former home being systematically destroyed by nature feels like watching your past being erased by forces that don't understand the concept of human attachment to material objects. You might not realise it, but you're developing survival skills that didn't exist in your vocabulary 6 months ago. Reading ice conditions becomes as important as reading street signs. Recognising signs of frostbite becomes more crucial than recognising social cues. Your body is adapting to conditions that should kill you, becoming something other than the person who started this journey. The meals take on an increasingly creative quality as cooks try to make pemmican and hardtack seem like food rather than survival fuel. Every dish is seasoned with desperation and served with a side of uncertain future. Dinner conversation focuses on practical matters like calorie conservation and weather patterns rather than the usual social pleasantries. Here's a fringe fact that sounds made up but isn't. Men trapped on ice for extended periods sometimes develop a condition called ice blindness, from the constant glare of sunlight reflecting off snow. It's like getting sunburned on your eyeballs while freezing to death everywhere else. The isolation from the outside world becomes a psychological weight that presses down like the ice pressure that destroyed your ship. No news, no mail, no confirmation that the rest of civilization still exists. For all you know, you could be the last humans alive playing out the final chapter of human history on an ice floe in the most hostile place on Earth. The endless daylight continues to mess with biological rhythms that evolved for a world with predictable patterns of light and dark. Your body doesn't know when to be hungry, when to be tired, or when to produce the hormones that regulate basic human functions. Time becomes elastic when the sun refuses to provide useful information about what part of the day you're experiencing. As another day ends without meaningful change in your situation, you realize you're adapting to hopelessness in ways that would have seemed impossible in your former life. You're learning to live with uncertainty that has no expiration date, trapped in a situation that has no clear resolution. You crawl into a sleeping bag that never quite warms up, listening to the ice shifting beneath your tent like a giant animal rolling over in its sleep. Tomorrow will bring more of the same, assuming the ice doesn't decide to rearrange itself while you're unconscious. Sweet dreams are made of these, apparently. You wake up to a sound that makes your blood freeze faster than the air outside your tent. The ice is cracking. Not the gentle creaking you've grown accustomed to, but sharp explosive cracks that sound like cannon fire echoing across the frozen landscape. Your floor is developing fault lines and you're sleeping on top of them. The camp erupts into controlled chaos as men stumble out of tents to discover that a lead, a channel of open water, has appeared 50 yards from where they went to sleep. The ice floe that was your solid foundation yesterday has decided to become an archipelago of smaller floes, each one floating independently on an ocean that will kill you in minutes. Frank Wilde organises an immediate evacuation of tents and supplies from areas where the ice is showing stress fractures, moving camp in temperatures that make your fingers useless within seconds, carrying everything you own across the ice that might split apart while you're walking on it. It's like playing hopscotch where missing a square means instant death. You grab your gear and stumble across ice that feels less solid with every step. The surface that seemed permanent yesterday now flexes and bends under your weight. You can hear water sloshing beneath thin layers of ice, reminding you that you're walking on frozen ocean that might decide to become unfrozen ocean without warning. Here's a comforting update on your housing situation. The ice floe you're living on has split into 3 separate pieces overnight. Your neighbourhood now consists of floating islands that are drifting apart at roughly the speed of a slow walk. Staying together requires jumping across gaps of open water that are getting wider by the hour. The dogs sense the instability with animal intelligence that makes human optimism look like a psychological disorder. They pace nervously, whining at ice formations that look solid to human eyes but apparently scream danger to creatures that evolved to survive in conditions that kill humans for entertainment. Thomas Audley's calculates that the ice pressure creating these breaks measures in the millions of tons. Forces that could move mountains are casually rearranging your living room while you try to drink morning coffee made from melted ice that tastes like penguin breath and regret. Listen to your floor having a geological conversation with itself. The sharp crack of ice splitting under pressure. The splash of new leads opening to reveal black water that steams in the cold air. The groan of ice chunks grinding against each other as they're pushed by currents and winds beyond human control. Shackleton moves through the chaos with the kind of calm that's either inspiring or a sign of complete psychological break from reality. He directs the evacuation like this is a minor inconvenience rather than a disaster that could scatter his men across floating islands in the most hostile ocean on Earth. You watch Frank Hurley trying to photograph the icebreak while simultaneously moving his equipment to safer ground. His commitment to documenting disaster while experiencing disaster is either the height of professionalism or a form of madness that hasn't been catalogued by psychiatry yet. The new camp gets established on what appears to be more stable ice, but stable is a relative term when your foundation is floating on water that's 2 miles deep and subject to currents and pressures that treat ice floes like toys in a bathtub, operated by an indifferent giant. You might not realise it, but you're experiencing geological forces that shape the coastlines of entire continents. This same ice pressure that's currently rearranging your campsite carved fjords, moved mountains, and created lakes thousands of miles away. You're getting a front row seat to processes that normally take centuries, compressed into hours. The meals become even more precious when you realise that every supply cache could be separated from you by open water at any moment. Food that seemed adequate when you had access to everything suddenly seems critically limited when half your supplies are floating away on ice islands that are drifting toward the horizon. Here's a fringe fact that sounds fictional. Ice floes can rotate as they drift, spinning slowly like enormous frozen turntables. Men have gone to sleep facing north and woken up facing south. Not because they moved, but because their entire neighbourhood decided to spin around during the night. The cold becomes more penetrating when you're surrounded by open water that radiates additional cold into air that was already cold enough to kill you. It's like nature decided that regular Antarctic cold wasn't challenging enough and added bonus cold for anyone unfortunate enough to be camping on breaking ice. The ship, still visible in the distance, looks even more doomed now that you understand how quickly ice can change from solid foundation to floating debris. The Endurance is being slowly digested by forces that could scatter its remains across miles of ocean without effort. The endless daylight makes it impossible to judge how much time has passed since the ice started breaking. Hours blend into more hours, marked only by the gradual widening of leads and the steady drift of ice floes that carry pieces of your camp in different directions. As the day progresses without the sun actually moving in any meaningful way, you realise you're living through a lesson in how quickly solid ground can become theoretical ground when you're floating on an ocean in the most hostile environment on Earth. You set up your tent on ice that feels solid but might decide to become liquid while you sleep. The sounds of your new environment include water lapping against ice edges that are closer to your tent than they were this morning. You crawl into a sleeping bag that smells like wet canvas and fear, listening to the ice continuing its geological conversation beneath your temporary home. Tomorrow you might wake up on a smaller ice floe, or a larger one, or floating in water that will end your adventure faster than you can process what's happening. Your new address is ice floe number 2, somewhere in the Weddell Sea, and your floor might decide to remodel itself while you're unconscious. You wake up to Frank Wilde announcing food rationing, with the kind of forced cheerfulness that makes everyone understand exactly how serious the situation has become. Meals that were already small get smaller. Portions that were already inadequate become homeopathic. You're now eating amounts of food that would qualify as snacks in your previous life while burning calories at a rate that would make marathon runners weep. The mathematics of survival become unavoidable. 28 men, diminishing food supplies, no rescue in sight, and winter approaching like a slow-motion avalanche of death. Each bite of pemmican could be precious. Each crumb of hardtack might matter. You're playing Russian roulette with nutrition, while trapped on ice that could kill you in ways that don't involve starvation. You step outside your tent and immediately feel your body burning energy just to maintain core temperature in air that's cold enough to freeze your breath before it leaves your mouth. Your metabolism is working overtime against conditions that want to shut down every biological process you need to stay alive. It's like running a marathon while standing still, except the marathon never ends and the track is trying to kill you. Here's a delightful update on your dietary situation. You're now eating less food per day than the average house cat, while living in conditions that require more calories than Arctic explorers typically burn. Your body is beginning to consume its own muscle mass for fuel, slowly eating itself to survive in an environment that seems designed to kill humans efficiently. The camp kitchen becomes a temple of conservation where every grain of sugar is weighed, every drop of cooking oil is measured, and waste becomes a concept so horrifying that men save breadcrumbs like they're made of gold. Meals are prepared with the precision of chemistry experiments, because chemistry experiments don't usually determine whether everyone lives or dies. Thomas Audie Lees creates detailed inventory lists that read like countdown timers to starvation. So many pounds of pemmican, so many tins of vegetables, so many days until the mathematics of survival reach their inevitable conclusion. It's like having a financial advisor whose job is calculating when you'll run out of the resources needed to remain alive. Listen to the new sounds of hunger beginning to affect the camp. Conversations about food that become increasingly detailed and obsessive. Men describing meals they remember from their previous lives with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious experiences. Stomachs that growl with a desperation that echoes across the ice. The dogs present a problem that no one wants to discuss directly. 29 animals that require food to survive, competing with humans for resources that are already inadequate for human survival. Every day the dogs eat is another day that human rations get stretched thinner. It's a calculation that everyone understands, but nobody wants to acknowledge. Shackleton maintains his optimism with what must be superhuman psychological effort, acting like reducing food rations is just another minor adjustment, rather than the beginning of slow starvation in conditions where your body needs more fuel than it's receiving. His leadership becomes a performance art piece about hope in the face of mathematical certainty. You watch Frank Hurley documenting the gradual effects of malnutrition on men who are already being pushed to their physical limits by cold that never stops and isolation that has no end date. His photographs capture the slow transformation of healthy humans into survival machines that are running on determination and rapidly diminishing fuel. The meals become religious experiences, not because they're spiritually meaningful, but because they're so precious that every bite requires conscious appreciation. Men eat slowly, chewing thoroughly, trying to extract maximum satisfaction from portions that would have been appetizers in their former lives. You might not realize it, but you're experiencing starvation in slow motion while simultaneously fighting the most hostile environment on Earth. Your body is being attacked from inside by inadequate nutrition and from outside by cold that wants to steal every calorie you consume before you can use it to stay alive. The ship in the distance continues its slow death, gradually being reduced from vessel to debris by ice pressure that treats human engineering like a minor inconvenience. Watching your former home disappear feels like watching your past being systematically erased while your future becomes increasingly mathematical and grim. Here's a fringe fact that illustrates the power of what you're facing. Explorers in extreme conditions sometimes develop a psychological condition where they become obsessed with food fantasies, spending hours describing elaborate meals they'll eat when rescued. It's the mind's way of coping with deprivation that threatens basic survival instincts. The cold becomes more penetrating when your body doesn't have adequate fuel to generate heat. Malnutrition makes you more susceptible to frostbite, hypothermia, and the kind of systematic physical breakdown that turns survival from difficult to impossible. The endless daylight makes it impossible to judge how much time has passed since the rationing began, but you can feel the effects in the way your clothes start fitting differently, the way simple tasks become more difficult, the way your body begins prioritizing essential functions over comfort. The isolation from the outside world takes on a new dimension when you realize that no one knows you're slowly starving on an ice floe in the most hostile place on Earth. Your situation has moved beyond uncomfortable to mathematically unsustainable, and rescue would need to happen soon to prevent outcomes that no one wants to calculate. As another day ends without meaningful improvement in your circumstances, you realize you're learning to live with hunger as a constant companion. Your stomach has become a clock that measures time in terms of inadequate meals and growing desperation. You crawl into a sleeping bag that feels larger because you're getting smaller, listening to the ice shifting beneath your tent and your own stomach reminding you that the mathematics of survival are working against you with every breath you take. Sweet dreams are increasingly difficult when your body is slowly consuming itself to stay alive in conditions that seem designed to kill humans in creative ways. You wake up to darkness, real darkness. Not the dim twilight you've grown accustomed to, but actual night that lasts for hours and promises to last for months. The Antarctic winter has arrived like a cosmic, practical joke played on people who are already experiencing the limits of human endurance. Your situation has just graduated from terrible to mathematically impossible. The temperature drops to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze your breath into crystals that fall to the ground like disappointed snow. Cold enough to make metal so brittle it snaps like glass. Cold enough to turn your tent into a fabric freezer that provides about as much warmth as a wet paper bag in a blizzard. You step outside and immediately understand why early explorers described Antarctic winter as hell frozen over. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the occasional aurora that paints the sky in colours that seem too beautiful for a place that's actively trying to kill you. Your flashlight beam disappears into black air so cold it seems solid. Here's your weather forecast for the next 4 months. Dark, darker, and darkest, with a chance of dying from any of 17 different causes related to cold, starvation, or losing your mind in conditions that would make sensory deprivation chambers seem like tropical vacations. The camp transforms into a collection of points of light scattered across ice that might as well be the surface of an alien planet. Each tent glows faintly from within, little bubbles of human determination surrounded by an environment that wants to extinguish them like candle flames in a hurricane made of ice and death. Frank Wilde organises work schedules around the minimal daylight that barely qualifies as light at all. Tasks that were difficult in summer become nearly impossible in winter darkness. Finding your way between tents requires following ropes like blind sailors navigating by touch, through a landscape that has no reference points. Thomas Audet-Lees calculates that the camp is drifting steadily northward, which sounds encouraging until you realise that northwards still means deeper into the Weddell Sea, farther from any shipping lanes, toward areas of the Antarctic that exist primarily on maps marked with phrases like unexplored and probably impossible to survive. Listen to the sounds of winter settling over your camp like a frozen blanket made of despair. The wind howls with the intensity that makes summer Antarctic wind seem gentle. The ice groans and cracks with sounds that suggest the entire landscape is being squeezed by forces that treat continents like playthings. The dogs huddle together in snow caves they dig instinctively, demonstrating survival wisdom that makes human intelligence look like a design flaw. They conserve body heat, share warmth, and sleep in positions that maximise survival efficiency. Watching them adapt makes you realise how poorly equipped humans are for this environment. Shackleton's optimism becomes increasingly supernatural as conditions deteriorate beyond the point where optimism should be mathematically possible. He organises evening entertainment in temperatures that make breathing difficult and darkness so complete that entertainment consists mainly of not dying while trying to have fun. You watch Frank Hurley attempting to photograph winter conditions with equipment that keeps freezing solid. His commitment to documenting the slow-motion destruction of human hope is either the height of artistic dedication or a form of madness that helps him avoid thinking about more immediate concerns like starving to death in the dark. The meals become even more precious when preparing them requires working in conditions that numb your hands faster than you can manipulate cooking equipment. Every hot drink is a minor miracle. Every warm bite of food feels like a temporary victory against forces that want to freeze you from the inside out. You might not realise it, but you're experiencing darkness that's more complete than anything most humans have ever encountered. You're living in a night that lasts for months, surrounded by cold that makes normal cold seem tropical, trapped on ice that's floating in an ocean that would kill you in seconds. The ship, barely visible in the winter darkness, looks like a ghost ship being slowly consumed by ice that has all the time in the world to complete its work of destruction. Watching your former home disappear into winter feels like watching civilization being erased by forces that don't understand the concept of human attachment to warmth and shelter. Here's a fringe fact that sounds fictional. Antarctic winter darkness is so complete that explorers sometimes reported feeling like they were floating in space, with no sense of up or down, no visual reference points, no way to orient themselves in an environment that has no landmarks. The cold penetrates. Layers of clothing that were adequate in summer conditions reaching your skin with fingers that feel like they're made of liquid nitrogen. Your body temperature begins dropping despite every effort to maintain warmth, and you start to understand why hypothermia is called the gentle death. The endless night messes with psychological processes that depend on natural light cycles. Your brain doesn't know when to produce the chemicals that regulate sleep, mood, and basic mental functions. Depression becomes a survival challenge that's as dangerous as frostbite and potentially more difficult to treat. The isolation from the outside world takes on a cosmic quality when you realise you're living through winter in the most hostile place on Earth, with no communication, no rescue, and no way to escape conditions that are literally designed to kill human beings efficiently. As the night continues without any promise of dawn arriving soon, you realise you've entered a phase of survival that few humans have experienced and even fewer have survived. You're living in conditions that make everything that came before seem like a pleasant camping trip. You crawl into a sleeping bag that provides minimal warmth in air, so cold it hurts to breathe, listening to the ice cracking and shifting beneath your tent while winter settles over your camp like a cosmic predator that has all the time in the world to finish its work. Welcome to Antarctic winter. Population 28 humans who are probably going to die, some dogs who are handling it better than the humans, and darkness that will last until spring, assuming you live long enough to see spring again. You wake up to ice crystals covering the inside of your tent, formed from the moisture in your own breath, freezing as you slept. Your sleeping bag has become a cocoon of ice and desperation. Getting dressed requires breaking through layers of frost that have turned your clothing into something that resembles fabric-flavoured cardboard. The morning routine now includes checking whether you still have all your fingers and toes, because frostbite creeps in during the night like a thief stealing pieces of your body while you sleep. Every extremity requires conscious attention and warming. Your feet have become foreign objects that belong to you but don't feel like they're part of you anymore. Frank Wilde organises work details in darkness so complete that men work by touch and instinct, maintaining equipment they can't see, moving supplies they locate by memory, keeping the camp functional through procedures that would be impossible in any reasonable environment. It's like running a household while blindfolded in a freezer set to kill. You step outside your tent and the darkness hits like a physical presence. Not the absence of light, but darkness so thick it seems to have weight and texture. Your flashlight creates a tiny bubble of visibility in an ocean of black that extends beyond every horizon. You're living inside the concept of night made absolute. Here's your daily weather report. Dark with a chance of darker, temperatures that make liquid nitrogen seem tropical, and wind that carries crystals of ice sharp enough to cut exposed skin. The wind chill makes the already impossible temperature feel like nature has developed a personal vendetta against your continued existence. The camp kitchen operates in conditions that would make cooking over a campfire seem luxurious. Preparing meals with hands that don't work properly, using fuel that has to be conserved like liquid gold, creating food from ingredients that freeze solid before you can get them from pot to mouth. Thomas Orde calculates position using navigation equipment that works sporadically in conditions it was never designed to encounter. His readings confirm that you're drifting steadily toward areas of the Antarctic that don't appear on most maps, because cartographers assume no one would be stupid enough to go there. Listen to the soundtrack of winter survival, the howl of wind that never stops, the crack and groan of ice adjusting to temperatures that make solid things behave like liquids, the sound of your own breathing, which you can hear because it's one of the few sounds that proves you're still alive in an environment designed to prove the opposite. The dogs provide the only source of warmth and companionship that doesn't require burning precious fuel. They share body heat with an efficiency that makes human heating systems look primitive. Playing with animals that are genuinely happy to see you, regardless of how desperate your situation has become, offers psychological therapy that no human has been trained to provide. Shackleton moves through the camp like a man performing a one-person show about optimism in the face of mathematical impossibility. He remembers birthdays that feel surreal to celebrate in conditions where birth seems like a cruel joke, and continued existence is uncertain from day to day. You watch Frank Hurley documenting winter survival with photographic equipment that barely functions in temperatures that make metal brittle, and chemicals behave unpredictably. His images capture moments of human endurance that look like art installations about the limits of what people can survive when they have no choice. The meals have evolved into ceremonies of gratitude for nutrition that wouldn't satisfy a small child under normal circumstances. Every bite is chewed slowly, savoured completely, and appreciated with the kind of reverence usually reserved for religious experiences or final meals. You might not realise it, but you're burning calories at a rate that would be unsustainable under any circumstances that involved having adequate food. Your body is consuming itself to generate heat in air so cold that breathing becomes a conscious act of will, rather than an automatic biological function. The ship, barely visible as a dark shape against slightly darker ice, continues its slow transformation from vessel to debris. Ice pressure works with winter cold to accelerate the destruction of your former home, reducing human engineering to splinters with the patience of geological processes compressed into weeks. Here's a fringe fact that illustrates what you're experiencing. Antarctic winter temperatures can drop so low the air itself begins to behave differently, becoming thicker, making sounds carry in strange ways, creating optical effects that make the darkness seem alive and malevolent. The isolation becomes a tangible thing that presses against your mind like the cold presses against your body. No contact with the outside world, no confirmation that the rest of humanity still exists, no way to communicate your situation to anyone who might theoretically be able to help. The endless night creates psychological challenges that most humans never experience. Your brain struggles to maintain normal functions without the light cues it evolved to depend on. Time becomes fluid when you can't distinguish between dawn and midnight, when every hour feels the same and every day blends into the next. As another period of consciousness ends without meaningful improvement in your situation, you realize you're adapting to conditions that should kill you, becoming something other than the person who started this journey. Your body and mind are changing in ways that might not be reversible, assuming you survive long enough for reversal to become relevant. You crawl into a sleeping bag that smells like frozen breath and determination, listening to the ice shifting beneath your tent and the wind reminding you that you're living in a place where humans don't belong and probably won't survive much longer. Tomorrow will bring more of the same, assuming tomorrow arrives and assuming you're still alive to experience it. You wake up to Frank Wilde announcing that the ice floe you've been calling home has shrunk to roughly half its original size overnight. The mathematics are becoming unavoidable. Less ice equals less stability, which equals higher probability of finding yourself floating in water that will kill you faster than you can process what's happening. The camp now occupies a space that feels like a tiny island surrounded by black water that steams in the cold air. Every direction you look, leads of open water reflect the minimal light with the kind of beauty that's terrifying when you understand that beauty could become your grave within seconds of the ice deciding to crack beneath your feet. You step carefully around the perimeter of your shrinking world, noting stress fractures in ice that was solid yesterday. The surface beneath your feet feels less permanent with every step. You're walking on a foundation that's actively dissolving, living on borrowed time measured in hours rather than days. Here's a comforting update on your real estate situation. Your neighbourhood now consists of an ice floe roughly the size of a football field, floating on an ocean that's 2 miles deep and surrounded by thousands of miles of the most hostile environment on Earth. Your property values are dropping as fast as your chances of survival. The crew moves with the careful deliberation of people who understand that every action might be their last. Supplies get reorganized for a rapid evacuation. Boats get prepared for launch into water so cold it would stop your heart before you could drown. Emergency plans get discussed for situations that have no good outcomes. Thomas Audet-Lees calculates that the current is carrying your diminishing ice floe toward areas where the ice pack becomes less stable, where flows break up more frequently, where your chances of finding solid ground approach zero with mathematical precision. That's as depressing as it is accurate. Listen to the sounds of your world literally dissolving around you. The lap of water against ice edges that are closer to your tent than they were this morning. The crack and splash of pieces of your foundation carving into the ocean. The constant groan of ice under stress that might give way at any moment. The dog sensed the instability with an animal intelligence that makes human denial look like a luxury you can't afford. They pace nervously, clustering together on the parts of the floe that feel most solid, demonstrating survival instincts that evolved specifically for conditions that kill creatures who make poor decisions about ice safety. Shackleton's optimism has evolved into something that transcends normal human psychology, becoming a performance art piece about hope in the face of physical laws that don't care about human determination. He discusses plans for the future while standing on ice that might not exist by tomorrow morning. You watch Frank Hurley preparing to abandon most of his remaining photographic equipment, keeping only what can be carried in a lifeboat that might need to be launched into freezing ocean at any moment. His commitment to documenting disaster while preparing to evacuate disaster is either admirable or a form of madness that helps cope with impossible circumstances. The meals are prepared with the knowledge that the camp kitchen might be underwater before dinner is finished. Cooking becomes a race against geological processes, preparing food while your foundation slowly dissolves beneath the stove. You might not realize it, but you're experiencing something that few humans have ever survived. The slow-motion dissolution of your entire world while trapped in conditions that kill most people within minutes of exposure. Your situation has moved beyond desperate to mathematically impossible. The ship, now completely crushed and scattered across the ice, looks like the remains of human ambition being digested by forces that treat engineering as a temporary inconvenience. Watching the debris of your former home reminds you that everything humans build is provisional when nature decides to apply pressure. Here's a fringe fact that sounds fictional but isn't. Ice floes can flip over suddenly, like massive frozen coins being tossed by invisible giants. Men have gone to sleep on solid ice and woken up in the water because their entire neighbourhood decided to turn upside down during the night. The cold has become a living presence that follows you everywhere, stealing heat from your body faster than you can produce it. creeping into your tent through gaps so small you can't see them, turning your shelter into a structure that provides the illusion of protection while offering none of the reality. The isolation takes on a cosmic quality when you realise that no one in the outside world knows you're living on a dissolving ice floe in the most remote place on Earth. Your situation exists in a bubble of space and time that might as well be another planet for all the connection it has to normal human experience. The endless winter night continues without any promise of dawn, making it impossible to judge how much time has passed since your world started shrinking. Days and nights blend into a continuous experience of existing in conditions that seem designed to test the absolute limits of human endurance. As another period of consciousness ends with your foundation smaller than it was when you woke up, you realise you're living through the final stages of a survival situation that has no good endings. The mathematics are working against you with every breath you take. You crawl into a sleeping bag on ice that might not be there tomorrow morning, listening to the water lapping closer to your tent and the sound of your world literally dissolving beneath you while you try to sleep. Your new address is shrinking ice floe number 3, middle of the Weddell Sea, and your lease is about to expire in ways that don't involve paperwork. You wake up to the sound of water lapping against ice that's now less than 10 feet from your tent. Your neighbourhood has shrunk to the size of a tennis court, and it's getting smaller by the hour. The edge of your world is close enough to reach with a good throw, beyond which lies water so cold it would stop your biological processes before you could finish drowning. The camp emergency protocols go into effect with the kind of calm efficiency that suggests everyone has been expecting this moment for weeks. Boats get lowered and prepared for launch. Essential supplies get sorted from non-essential supplies, which turns out to be a surprisingly difficult decision when everything seems essential for survival. Frank Wild organises the evacuation with military precision that can't quite hide the fact that launching lifeboats into Antarctic Ocean during winter is essentially choosing your method of death, rather than avoiding death altogether. The boats offer mobility at the cost of exposure to conditions that will kill you more efficiently than staying on diminishing ice. You help load supplies into boats that look absurdly small compared to the ocean they are about to enter. These wooden shells, designed for short trips in moderate weather, are about to become your only homes in an environment that destroys ships designed specifically for polar conditions. Here's your transportation update. You're about to trade a shrinking ice floe for 3 small boats on an ocean where the water temperature hovers around 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The upgrade from probably going to die to definitely going to die faster doesn't feel like an improvement. The final moments on solid ice feel surreal, like packing for a trip you know you're not coming back from. Every item that gets left behind might have been the thing that could have saved your life. Every pound of weight in the boats might be the pound that sinks them when the going gets rough. Thomas Ord Lees calculates the bearing to the nearest land, which turns out to be farther away than the boats can reasonably travel in conditions where reasonable travel is a concept that doesn't apply. His navigation charts show vast expanses of ocean marked with helpful notations like uncharted and ice conditions unknown. Listen to the final sounds of your ice floe home, the crack and splash as pieces break away and float off toward the horizon. The lap of water against the ice that's now supporting the weight of everything you own, plus 28 humans who are about to trust their lives to boats that were never designed for this kind of work. The dogs get loaded into boats with the resigned patience of animals who understand that their humans have run out of good options. 29 creatures whose survival depends entirely on people who are currently making decisions based on choosing between different varieties of probable death. Shackleton delivers what amounts to a farewell speech to solid ground, though he frames it as a speech about new adventures, rather than acknowledging that you're all about to trade the slow death of starvation on ice for the quick death of exposure in boats on freezing ocean. You watch Frank Hurley taking final photographs of the camp, the ice floe, and the moment when human determination meets the mathematical certainty of natural forces. His images capture the transition from one form of hopelessness to another, documenting optimism in the face of physics that don't care about human will to survive. The boats launch into water so cold you can see it steaming, carrying everything you own and everyone you've shared this experience with, into an environment that kills most people within minutes of immersion. The transition from solid ground to floating in Antarctic Ocean feels like stepping off the edge of the world. You might not realise it, but you're now experiencing mobility for the first time in over a year. except the mobility involves floating in small wooden boats on an ocean that wants to kill you in ways that don't require creativity or imagination. Freedom has never felt more like a death sentence. The ice floe shrinks behind you as the boats move away from what was home for months. Watching your former neighbourhood disappear feels like watching the last connection to safety dissolve into an ocean that extends beyond every horizon, with water that would end your story in seconds. Here's a fringe fact that illustrates what you're facing. Antarctic ocean conditions can change from calm to life-threatening in minutes, with waves that can swamp small boats and winds that can blow them off course faster than human navigation can compensate. The cold becomes more penetrating when you're surrounded by water that radiates additional cold into air that was already cold enough to kill you. Your boat offers no protection from wind that cuts through every layer of clothing you own, turning your transportation into a mobile freezer with no insulation. The isolation takes on a new dimension when you realise you're now floating on an ocean in the most remote place on Earth, with no communication, no rescue, and no way to return to even the minimal safety of solid ice. Your situation has achieved a level of desperation that most people never experience and wouldn't survive. As the boats move away from the dissolving ice floe, you realise you've traded one impossible situation for another impossible situation, except now you're mobile enough to experience different varieties of hopelessness as you float toward uncertain destinations on an ocean that doesn't care about human survival. You settle into a boat that rocks constantly in waves that remind you that you're floating on water deep enough to swallow mountains, surrounded by conditions that have killed every explorer who wasn't extraordinarily lucky or extraordinarily skilled at staying alive in places where humans don't belong. Your new address is lifeboat number 1, somewhere in the Weddell Sea, and your life expectancy is now measured in days rather than weeks, assuming the boats don't sink or get separated, or encounter weather that turns manageable desperation into immediate catastrophe. You wake up in the bottom of a boat that's rocking in waves cold enough to kill you if you fall overboard, which is increasingly likely as exhaustion makes every movement a potential disaster. Your sleeping bag is soaked with spray from waves that freeze before they finish splashing, creating an ice shell around fabric that was supposed to keep you warm. The 3 boats move across water so black it looks like liquid space, following leads between ice floes that could close at any moment and trap you in channels where the wind funnels with enough force to capsize boats that are already overloaded with supplies and men who are slowly losing the ability to perform the tasks that keep everyone alive. Frank Wilde coordinates the small flotilla with hand signals and shouted commands that get lost in wind that carries sound away faster than human voices can produce it. Navigation. Between boats becomes a constant challenge when visibility drops to a few yards and every direction looks identical to every other direction. You bail water from the boat constantly, using containers that freeze to your hands, removing liquid that would sink your transportation if it accumulated faster than you can remove it. Every scoop of water over the side is a small victory against physics that want to pull you under an ocean that would end your story in seconds. Here's your current housing situation. You're living in a wooden boat roughly the size of a small bedroom, shared with 8 other men and supplies that take up most of the remaining space. Privacy is a concept from another lifetime. Personal space is measured in inches. Comfort is a memory from before you decided to explore the most hostile place on Earth. The meals consist of whatever can be prepared in a boat that's constantly moving, using fuel that has to be conserved because there's no way to get more, creating nutrition from supplies that get smaller every day, while your caloric needs remain absurdly high for people who are essentially camping on a frozen ocean. Thomas Audet Lees attempts navigation with instruments that work sporadically in conditions they were never designed to encounter, trying to determine your position on an ocean, where position matters less than simply staying alive long enough to worry about where you are. Listen to the sounds of your new environment. Waves slapping against the hull with rhythm that never stops. Wind cutting across water with sounds that range from whistle to roar, depending on how much it wants to kill you at any given moment. And underneath it all, the creak and groan of wooden boats that are being asked to perform beyond their design specifications. The dogs are seasick, which would be funny if seasick dogs in freezing temperatures weren't a life-threatening emergency, requiring care and attention from humans who don't have energy to spare for anything beyond their own survival. Caring for animals that are miserable adds another layer of complexity to a situation that was already mathematically impossible. Shackleton moves between boats when conditions allow, maintaining morale and coordination with leadership skills that have evolved beyond normal human psychology into something that transcends the reality of floating in smaller boats on an ocean that wants to kill everyone involved in this adventure. You watch Frank Hurley attempting to photograph boat travel in conditions where taking photographs requires exposing equipment to spray and cold that destroy cameras faster than they can capture images. His commitment to documentation while experiencing conditions that make documentation nearly impossible is either inspiring or a sign of priorities that don't match the situation. The ice formations you pass look like frozen cities, or abstract sculptures created by forces that don't understand the concept of human scale. Icebergs tower above your boats like buildings, reminding you that you're floating in an environment where the decorations are large enough to sink ships and couldn't care less about your continued existence. You might not realize it, but you're experiencing transportation that's more dangerous than most forms of extreme sports, except extreme sports are voluntary and usually last for hours rather than weeks. Your current situation combines the worst aspects of mountaineering, ocean, sailing and surviving in conditions that kill most people quickly. The cold penetrates every layer of protection you have, reaching your skin through gaps in clothing that seemed adequate when you had the option of going inside to warm up. Your boat offers no insulation from air and water that want to steal heat from your body faster than you can produce it. Here's a fringe fact that sounds made up but isn't. Antarctic ocean spray can freeze so quickly that it forms ice sculptures on boats, gradually adding weight that can sink vessels that are already operating at their maximum capacity for staying afloat in hostile conditions. The isolation becomes more complete when you realise that no one in the outside world knows you're floating in small boats on an ocean in the most remote place on Earth. Your situation exists in a bubble of space and time that has no connection to normal human experience or any reasonable expectation of rescue. The endless winter night makes it impossible to judge how much time has passed since you left the relative safety of solid ice. Hours blend into more hours marked only by the rhythm of waves and the gradually increasing desperateness of your situation. As another period of consciousness ends with you still floating on water that could kill you instantly, you realise you've traded the slow death of starvation on ice for the quick death of exposure in boats. Except the quick death is taking longer than expected and might turn into slow death anyway. You try to sleep in the bottom of a boat that rocks constantly, listening to water against the hull and wind that reminds you that you're completely exposed to conditions that have killed every explorer who wasn't extraordinarily lucky, extraordinarily skilled or extraordinarily fictional. Your new address is Lifeboat No. 1, middle of the Weddell Sea, and your transportation doubles as your bedroom, kitchen, and probable coffin, depending on how the weather decides to behave in the next few days. You wake up to Frank Wilde pointing toward the horizon, where something that isn't ice or water creates a dark line against the grey sky. Land, actual land. After months of floating on ice and water that could disappear at any moment, the concept of solid ground that doesn't melt, break apart or sink seems too impossible to believe. The boats push through water that gets rougher as you approach what navigation confirms is Elephant Island, a chunk of rock and ice that sticks up from the southern ocean-like nature's middle finger extended toward anyone stupid enough to be sailing in these waters during Antarctic winter. You help row against waves that seem personally offended by your attempt to reach shore, fighting currents that want to carry you past the island and back into the open ocean where your story would end with mathematical certainty. Every stroke of the oars is a small victory against forces that don't care about human determination to survive. Here's your destination report. Elephant Island is a piece of rock roughly 25 miles long, covered with ice, surrounded by water that kills people in minutes, inhabited by seals and penguins who are much better adapted to these conditions than humans who made poor life choices about polar exploration. The landing becomes an epic struggle against surf that wants to smash your boats against rocks that would turn wooden vessels into kindling and passengers into casualties. Waves that look manageable from a distance become walls of freezing water that could end your journey seconds before reaching the first solid ground you've seen in over a year. Thomas Orde-Lees coordinates the landing with the kind of precision required when failure means everyone dies and success means everyone gets to live long enough to face new and creative ways of probably dying on an island that's slightly more hospitable than floating in boats, but still located in the most hostile environment on Earth. Listen to the sound of waves against rock, the first natural sound you've heard that doesn't involve ice breaking, water freezing, or wind trying to kill you. The crash and hiss of surf feels almost musical after months of listening to your various shelters being destroyed by conditions that don't understand the concept of human comfort. The dogs leap from boats to shore with the enthusiasm of creatures who understand that solid ground, even frozen solid ground, is better than floating on water that wants to kill them. Watching animals demonstrate joy at reaching land reminds you that happiness is possible even in conditions that seem designed to eliminate happiness permanently. Shackleton organises the beach landing with the efficiency of someone who's been planning this moment for months, as if reaching Elephant Island was always the goal rather than a desperate attempt to find any piece of solid earth in an ocean full of water that kills people for recreation. You help drag boats onto a beach made of rocks and ice, establishing a camp on solid ground that feels like the most luxurious accommodation you've ever experienced, even though it's essentially a collection of tents on frozen rocks surrounded by conditions that would kill most people within hours. The camp setup includes finding shelter from wind that cuts across the island, with the kind of efficiency that makes you understand why early explorers described some places as unsuitable for human habitation. The island provides solid ground at the cost of exposure to weather that treats human bodies like temporary inconveniences. You might not realise it, but you've just accomplished something that most people would consider impossible: surviving months on ice and ocean in conditions that kill trained explorers, reaching land after boat travel that should have ended in disaster, and establishing camp in a place where camping is more dangerous than most forms of extreme sports. The meals prepared on solid ground taste different, not because the food has changed, but because eating while sitting on rock that won't dissolve, break apart, or float away adds a psychological seasoning that makes even hardtack and pemmican seem like celebrations of human persistence. Frank Hurley sets up photography equipment on stable ground for the first time in over a year, documenting the moment when human determination met natural forces and somehow achieved a draw rather than the total defeat that seemed mathematically certain just days earlier. Here's a fringe fact that illustrates what you've accomplished. Elephant Island got its name from the elephant seals that live there, creatures that are perfectly adapted to conditions that kill humans. You're now sharing real estate with animals that evolved specifically to survive in an environment where your species doesn't belong. The island offers protection from the ocean while presenting new challenges related to weather that funnels between peaks and creates wind conditions that can blow tents away along with the people sleeping in them. You've traded one set of survival problems for a different set of survival problems. The isolation takes on a new quality when you realise you're now stranded on a piece of rock in the Southern Ocean, with no way to communicate with the outside world and no reason to expect rescue from a place that doesn't appear on most maps, because cartographers assume no one would be insane enough to go there. The endless winter night continues, but now you're experiencing it from solid ground rather than floating ice or rocking boats. The darkness feels less threatening when you're not constantly worried about your foundation disappearing, dissolving, or sinking beneath you. As your first night on land ends, you realise you've survived the impossible and reached a place that's only slightly less likely to kill you than where you came from. Elephant Island offers solid ground, protection from the ocean, and new ways to experience the creativity of Antarctic conditions in finding methods to challenge human survival. You fall asleep in a tent that's sitting on rock that won't melt, break apart, or float away during the night. Your new address is Elephant Island, Southern Ocean, and while it's still located in the most hostile environment on Earth, it's an address that involves solid ground rather than floating death traps. You wake up on solid ground that doesn't move, shift, or threaten to disappear while you sleep, which feels like the most luxurious accommodation you've experienced since this adventure began. The rock beneath your tent is frozen, solid, and uncomfortable in ways that would have seemed intolerable in your previous life, but now feels like stability itself. The camp on Elephant Island spreads along a rocky beach that's protected from the worst ocean swells, but completely exposed to wind that funnels between peaks with the kind of efficiency that makes you understand why meteorologists use terms like life-threatening when describing weather conditions. Frank Wild organises daily routines that revolve around the basic tasks of staying alive, in conditions where staying alive requires constant attention to details that, most people never think about. Collecting water, maintaining shelter, preserving body heat, and avoiding the kind of exposure that turns survival situations into recovery operations. You explore the immediate area around camp, discovering that Elephant Island consists mainly of rock, ice, and wind, inhabited by seals and penguins who seem genuinely puzzled by the presence of creatures so poorly adapted to conditions they handle with casual efficiency. Here's your neighbourhood report. Elephant Island offers solid ground, protection from ocean swells, fresh water in the form of ice that can be melted, and wildlife that can be hunted for food, assuming you can catch animals that evolved specifically to survive in conditions that kill humans for entertainment. The meals improve slightly due to the availability of seal meat, which tastes like the ocean in solid form but provides protein and fat that your body desperately needs for generating heat and air, cold enough to freeze your breath before it leaves your mouth. Fresh meat, even meat that tastes like liquid regret, becomes a delicacy when your alternative is hardtack and pemmican. Thomas Audet-Lees calculates the island's position and determines that you're stranded roughly 850 miles from the nearest point of civilization. Assuming civilization includes whaling stations on sub-Antarctic islands that are themselves hundreds of miles from anywhere humans normally consider habitable. Listen to the new sounds of your environment. Wind that howls across rock with sounds that range from whistle to scream depending on weather conditions. Waves crashing against the island's shores with rhythm that never stops. And occasionally the calls of seals and penguins who seem to be commenting on the poor life choices that brought humans to their neighbourhood. The dogs adapt to island life with the kind of efficiency that makes human adaptation look clumsy and inefficient. They hunt, explore, establish territories, and demonstrate survival skills that evolved specifically for conditions where your species struggles to maintain basic biological functions. Shackleton maintains group morale with leadership that has evolved beyond normal human psychology into something that transcends the mathematical reality of being stranded on an island in the most hostile ocean on Earth, with no communication, no rescue plan, and no reasonable expectation of survival. You watch Frank Hurley documenting island life with photographic equipment that works better on solid ground but still struggles with conditions that freeze chemicals, crack glass as plates, and challenge every assumption about how cameras are supposed to function in environments where they're supposed to function. The camp develops its own social ecosystem based on shared survival tasks and the kind of intimacy that develops between people who are completely dependent on each other for continued existence. Privacy becomes a luxury that doesn't exist when everyone's survival depends on everyone else's competence at staying alive. You might not realise it, but you're experiencing island life that's more isolated than most people can imagine. You're living on a piece of rock in an ocean that's thousands of miles from the nearest continent, surrounded by conditions that kill most people quickly and efficiently. The weather patterns on Elephant Island include wind that can reach hurricane strength, temperatures that make normal cold seem tropical, and precipitation that comes in forms you didn't know existed before experiencing weather that treats human comfort as a concept that doesn't apply to this latitude. Here's a fringe fact that illustrates your situation. Elephant Island is considered one of the most remote places on Earth, so isolated that it took decades for explorers to find it consistently, and most people who found it left as quickly as possible because it's not suitable for extended human habitation. The isolation from the outside world becomes more complete when you realise that no one knows you're alive, stranded, or in need of rescue. Your situation exists in a bubble of space and time that has no connection to normal human experience or any communication system that could bring help. The endless Antarctic night continues, but now you're experiencing it from a position that offers some protection from the worst weather while still exposing you to conditions that would be considered emergency survival situations anywhere else on Earth. The island provides resources for survival including fresh water, potential food sources, and shelter materials, but accessing these resources requires skills and energy that you're developing through necessity rather than training or preparation. As another day ends on solid ground that won't disappear during the night, you realise you've achieved a form of stability that seemed impossible just weeks ago. Elephant Island offers challenges that are merely life-threatening rather than mathematically impossible. You fall asleep in a tent that's sitting on the rock that won't melt, float away, or sink beneath you during the night. Your new address is Camp on Elephant Island, and while it's still located in one of the most hostile environments on Earth, it's an address that involves solid ground and protection from the ocean that nearly killed you multiple times. Life on Elephant Island. It's still trying to kill you, but at least it's not moving while it does it. You wake up to Shackleton announcing that he's taking 5 men and sailing 850 miles across the most dangerous ocean on Earth in a 22-foot boat to get help, which sounds like the kind of plan that people make when all the reasonable plans have been eliminated by circumstances that don't care about human preferences for reasonable solutions. The James Caird, one of your 3 lifeboats, gets modified for ocean travel with material salvaged from the camp, and pure determination to create something that might survive crossing waters that regularly destroys the ships designed specifically for polar conditions. Watching men turn a lifeboat into a deep ocean vessel using canvas, nails and optimism feels like witnessing engineering as performance art. Frank Wilde will remain on Elephant Island with the other 22 men, maintaining camp and keeping everyone alive while waiting for rescue that might never come, assuming the rescue mission doesn't end with Shackleton and his crew becoming additional casualties of the Southern Ocean's indifference to human survival. You help prepare the James Caird for launch into waters that have killed every explorer who wasn't extraordinarily lucky, extraordinarily skilled, or extraordinarily fictional. The modifications include decking over the boat to provide protection from waves that would otherwise fill it with water cold enough to kill everyone aboard within minutes. Here's the mission report. 6 men will attempt to sail 850 miles across the Southern Ocean during Antarctic winter, navigating by dead reckoning and star sights when stars are visible, in a boat that's about as seaworthy as a floating coffin with ambitions beyond its engineering specifications. The crew selection for the rescue mission includes Shackleton for leadership, Frank Worsley for navigation, Tom Crean for general competence, Harry McNish for carpentry skills, Timothy McCarthy for sailing ability, and Vincent for the reasons that probably made sense at the time, but seem questionable when you're sending people into conditions that kill trained sailors regularly. Thomas Orderlies calculates the navigation challenges involved in finding South Georgia Island, which appears on charts as a small speck in an ocean that extends beyond every horizon, approached through waters where weather conditions can change from manageable to life-threatening faster than human navigation can compensate. Listen to the final preparations for a journey that sounds like suicide disguised as a rescue mission. The sound of canvas being stretched over wooden frames, the clink of nails being driven into wood that has to hold together in conditions that regularly destroy ships built in proper shipyards by people who knew what they were doing. The remaining men organise camp life around the assumption that they'll be waiting on Elephant Island for months, possibly forever, depending on whether the rescue mission succeeds or becomes another example of why the Southern Ocean is called the most dangerous body of water on Earth. Shackleton's farewell to the men staying on Elephant Island feels like a scene from a movie about heroic failure, except you're living inside the movie and that the failure part might be more accurate than the heroic part, depending on how well a 22-foot boat handles waves that can reach 60 feet in height. You watch the James Caird being launched into surf that immediately demonstrates why most people consider launching small boats in Southern Ocean conditions to be a form of elaborate suicide. The boat disappears behind waves that look like moving mountains made of water cold enough to stop your heart before you finish drowning. The rescue mission sails away from Elephant Island toward the horizon, where South Georgia Island supposedly exists. Assuming the navigation is accurate, the weather cooperates, and the boat doesn't encounter any of the hazards that make crossing the Southern Ocean in winter a guaranteed way to become a cautionary tale about human ambition. You might not realise it, but you've just witnessed something that most people would consider impossible. 6 men attempting to cross 850 miles of the most dangerous ocean on Earth in a boat that was never designed for the conditions it's about to encounter during the worst possible season, with navigation equipment that works sporadically. The island camp settles into routines designed around waiting for rescue that might never come from a mission that violates every principle of safe ocean travel. Daily life becomes a balance between maintaining hope and preparing for the possibility that the James Caird and its crew have become additional victims of waters that don't discriminate between heroes and fools. Here's a fringe fact that illustrates what you're facing. The Southern Ocean around South Georgia Island is considered so dangerous that modern ships with GPS, weather routing and satellite communication still avoid the area during winter, when conditions regularly sink vessels that are exponentially more seaworthy than a modified lifeboat. The weather on Elephant Island provides daily reminders of what the rescue crew is experiencing, amplified by ocean conditions that turn manageable storms into life-threatening emergencies. Every blast of wind across the island makes you wonder whether the James Caird is still floating or has become debris scattered across waves that treat human engineering as temporary inconvenience. The isolation becomes more complete when you realise that your survival now depends entirely on 6 men successfully completing a journey that professional sailors would consider suicidal, in conditions that kill people who make careers out of surviving dangerous ocean crossings. As the first day ends with the James Caird somewhere beyond the horizon, you realise you're now living through the waiting phase of a rescue mission that has already achieved legendary status for ambition and questionable decision-making about the relationship between human determination and natural forces that don't care about human determination. You fall asleep in a tent on solid ground, listening to the wind that reminds you that somewhere out there, 6 men are experiencing the same wind, amplified by ocean conditions that turn weather into an active attempt to kill anyone foolish enough to be sailing through it in a 22-foot boat. Your new routine? Wake up on Elephant Island, perform survival tasks, wonder whether the rescue mission is still alive, repeat until rescue arrives or doesn't. You wake up on Elephant Island knowing that somewhere beyond the horizon, 6 men are either sailing toward rescue or have already become casualties of an ocean that treats human ambition like a minor entertainment before getting back to the serious business of being the most dangerous body of water on Earth. Frank Wilde organises island life with the kind of routine that keeps men busy enough to avoid spending all day calculating the mathematical probability that the rescue mission has already ended in disaster, and everyone left on Elephant Island will die slowly of starvation or quickly of exposure depending on which kills them first. The daily schedule includes hunting seals and penguins for food, maintaining shelters that provide minimal protection from weather that seems personally offended by human presence, and performing the psychological maintenance required to keep 22 men sane while waiting for rescue that might never arrive. You help build stone windbreaks using rocks that have to be pried from frozen ground, creating barriers against wind that cuts across the island with the efficiency of nature's own knife designed specifically for removing heat from human bodies. Every stone placed is a small victory against conditions that want to kill you through systematic heat theft. Here's your daily weather report. Cold, windy and hostile, with a chance of getting colder, windier and more hostile as winter progresses toward conditions that make current conditions seem tropical by comparison. The forecast includes continued attempts by the environment to kill you in creative ways. The meals improve slightly due to fresh meat from local wildlife, but improve is relative when your alternatives are hardtack that could break teeth and pemmican that taste like concentrated disappointment. Seal meat tastes like the ocean decided to become solid, but it provides nutrients your body needs for generating heat in air that wants to steal every calorie you consume. Thomas Audilys calculates how long the island's food resources might last if hunting continues to be successful, creating mathematical estimates that depend on variables like weather, seal populations, and whether the men retain enough strength to catch animals that are much better adapted to these conditions than the people trying to hunt them. Listen to the sounds of your new routine. Wine that never stops, ranging from steady to hurricane force depending on weather patterns that seem designed to test human tolerance for noise that suggests the planet is trying to blow you off its surface. Waves against the island's shores that provide constant rhythm reminding you that you're surrounded by water that kills people for recreation. The men develop entertainment systems based on storytelling, card games, and conversations that avoid discussing the obvious topic of whether the rescue mission is still alive or has become another example of why crossing the Southern Ocean in winter is generally considered a form of elaborate suicide. Shackleton's absence creates a leadership vacuum that Frank Wilde fills with the kind of calm competence that suggests he either has complete confidence in the rescue mission or has accepted that everyone is probably going to die and decided to maintain morale anyway. His leadership style involves optimism that transcends mathematical reality. You watch the horizon every day, looking for signs of rescue ships that probably aren't coming because the rescue mission probably didn't survive long enough to reach civilization, let alone organise return expeditions to islands that don't appear on most navigation charts because they're located in places where humans don't belong. The camp develops its own social dynamics based on shared survival tasks and the kind of intimacy that emerges between people who are completely dependent on each other for continued existence while waiting for rescue that exists mainly as a theoretical possibility rather than practical expectation. You might not realise it, but you're experiencing waiting that's more psychologically challenging than most forms of anxiety. You're living in suspense that has no resolution to date, depending on variables that are completely beyond your control, in conditions that kill people who lose focus on basic survival tasks. The island weather provides daily demonstrations of what the rescue crew is experiencing, amplified by ocean conditions that turn uncomfortable weather into actively homicidal weather. Every storm that crosses Elephant Island makes you wonder whether the James Caird is still floating or has become debris. Here's a fringe fact that puts your situation in perspective. Elephant Island is so remote that it took decades for explorers to find it consistently, and most people who found it left as quickly as possible, because extended human habitation requires resources and conditions that don't exist in places located this far from everything humans consider civilization. The isolation becomes a tangible presence that affects psychological health in ways that most people never experience. You're cut off from all human contact, except the 21 other men sharing your situation, with no communication, no news, and no confirmation that the outside world still exists. The endless Antarctic night continues, creating sensory deprivation conditions that mess with biological rhythms, mental health, and the kind of psychological stability that people need for making good decisions about survival, in environments that punish poor decision-making with death. As weeks pass without any sign of rescue, you begin to understand that waiting for help that might never arrive, while slowly starving on an island in the most hostile ocean on Earth, is its own form of extreme endurance challenge that tests psychological limits as thoroughly as physical limits. You fall asleep in a tent that provides minimal protection from conditions that actively want to kill you, listening to wind that reminds you that somewhere beyond the horizon, your rescue depends entirely on 6 men successfully completing a journey that violates every principle of safe ocean navigation. Your daily routine has become wake up, perform survival tasks, scan the horizon for ships that probably aren't coming, maintain hope that defies mathematical analysis, repeat until rescue or death, whichever arrives first. You wake up on Elephant Island to Frank Wilde announcing that there's a ship on the horizon, which sounds like the kind of hallucination that develops after months of scanning empty ocean for a rescue, that exists mainly as psychological necessity rather than reasonable expectation. But the ship is real. The Chilean tug Yelcho, chartered by Shackleton after his successful completion of the most insane rescue mission in polar exploration history, approaches the island carrying the news that the James Caird crew not only survived 850 miles of Southern Ocean, but managed to land on South Georgia Island and organise a rescue expedition. The evacuation from Elephant Island happens with the efficiency of people who have been mentally preparing for this moment while simultaneously expecting it never to arrive. 22 men who survived months on an island that kills most people quickly pack their possessions and prepare to return to a world that assumed they were dead. You board the rescue ship feeling like someone returning from another planet rather than another continent. The transition from survival conditions that kill people efficiently to a vessel with adequate food, heating and protection from weather feels like science fiction rather than rescue operations. Here's your final status report. 28 men entered the Antarctic planning to cross the continent on foot. 28 men survived the destruction of their ship, months on drifting ice, boat journeys that should have ended in disaster, and extended stays on islands where humans don't belong. 0 casualties, which violates every statistical analysis of polar expedition mortality rates. The return to civilization involves readjusting to conditions that most people consider normal but feel luxurious beyond description after experiencing life in environments designed to kill humans efficiently. Hot food, warm rooms, and beds that don't move feel like technologies from the future rather than basic amenities. Frank Hurley's photographs document the complete story of human endurance in conditions that most people couldn't survive for days, creating a visual record of what happens when human determination meets natural forces that don't care about human survival, but somehow fails to kill everyone involved. The rescue mission that started as desperate improvisation becomes recognised as one of the greatest navigation achievements in maritime history. Crossing 850 miles of Southern Ocean in winter, in a 22-foot boat with navigation equipment that barely functioned, locating a small island in an ocean that extends beyond every horizon. You might not realise it, but you've just survived something that most people would consider impossible. Nearly 2 years in Antarctic conditions that kill trained explorers, including months on drifting ice, ocean travel in lifeboats, and extended island survival. Emerging with all crew members alive and mostly intact, the Endurance expedition becomes legendary not for reaching its original destination, but for demonstrating what humans can survive when survival becomes the only option. And failure means death in conditions that don't offer second chances or partial credit for good intentions. Shackleton's leadership during the expedition establishes standards for crisis management that psychologists will study for decades, analysing how one person maintained group morale and decision-making competence in situations that should have resulted in psychological breakdown and group dissolution. The story spreads through a world that's simultaneously dealing with World War I, putting the expedition's survival challenges in perspective relative to other examples of human endurance under conditions that test the limits of what people can experience and remain human. You return to England carrying experiences that most people will never have, and probably shouldn't survive, with stories that sound fictional when told to people whose most challenging survival situations involve power outages and delayed flights. Here's the final fringe fact. The Endurance expedition achieved something that violates statistical analysis of polar exploration mortality. Most expeditions that encountered similar conditions resulted in casualties ranging from significant to total. Your expedition lost no one, which makes it either extraordinarily lucky or extraordinarily well managed, depending on your perspective on the relationship between human competence and natural forces. The expedition's failure to achieve its original goal comes irrelevant compared to its success at keeping everyone alive in conditions designed to kill people efficiently. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones where everyone gets to go home and tell stories about why they probably shouldn't have survived. Years later, you'll realise that you survived something that existed at the intersection of human ambition and natural forces that don't care about human ambition, emerging from an experience that changed your understanding of what humans can endure when endurance becomes the only alternative to death. The Antarctic remains exactly as hostile as it was before your expedition, continuing to kill people who underestimate conditions that treat human engineering as temporary inconvenience and human determination as entertainment before getting back to the serious business of being the most dangerous place on Earth. You carry with you the knowledge that you spent nearly 2 years in conditions that should have killed you, survived through a combination of leadership, luck, and the kind of human cooperation that emerges when cooperation becomes literally a matter of life and death. Your new address is wherever normal humans live, which feels like paradise compared to ice floes, lifeboats and islands where the weather actively tries to kill you. But you'll always remember what it felt like to live at the edge of human survival, in places where humans don't belong but somehow occasionally manage to survive anyway. The Endurance lies somewhere beneath Antarctic ice, slowly being crushed by the same forces that almost killed you, serving as a monument to human ambition and a reminder that nature doesn't care about human plans, human engineering or human survival. It just is, patient and hostile, and absolutely indifferent to whether you live or die, and somehow against all mathematical probability, you lived. So before you close this video and go back to your heated room with running water and food delivery options, take a moment to appreciate that you just experienced, from the safety of your couch, survival conditions that would kill most people within hours. Drop a comment about where you're watching from and what time it is in your warm, comfortable, definitely not trying to kill you location. And if you enjoyed this journey into the mathematics of human endurance, maybe like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely want to explore more stories about people who probably shouldn't have survived, but somehow did anyway. Sweet dreams, and remember, your worst day probably doesn't involve being slowly crushed by ice while starving in the most hostile place on Earth. Pleasant thoughts indeed.